What would make a global superstar promise to keep the most important person in her life completely hidden from the world? For nearly 6 decades, Dolly Parton kept a vow that puzzled millions. And now, after tragedy struck, she's finally explaining why. The biggest female star in country music history, a woman whose face has been on magazine covers, movie screens, and theme park billboards for over half a century. And yet, the man she loved most, the world never saw his face. Not once. Not at award shows, not at movie premieres, not even at the grand opening of her own theme park. For 58 years, Carl Dean remained what some called country music's greatest mystery. People questioned if he even existed. Tabloids speculated about secret lives, but Dolly just smiled that knowing smile and kept her promise. Then, on March 3, 2025, Carl Dean passed away at age 82. And in her grief, Dolly Parton began to reveal the truth about their arrangement, a promise made on a night that changed everything, a love story that defied every rule of fame, and a sacrifice so profound that it would shape both their lives forever. This is that story. Let's rewind to 1964, Nashville, Tennessee, a scorching summer day. An 18-year-old girl stands outside a laundromat, her entire life packed into a cardboard suitcase. She'd graduated high school just the night before, and now here she was, fresh off the bus from the Smoky Mountains, wearing those same graduation clothes, completely alone in Music City. Her name? Dolly Rebecca Parton. She wasn't a star yet. She was just a girl with an impossible dream and exactly enough money to wash her clothes before starting her new life. As she stood there in the blazing sun, she caught the attention of a young man cruising by in a white Chevrolet. Now, Dolly was used to men noticing her. With her distinctive look and natural beauty, she'd learned early that attention came with the territory. But what happened next was different. The man rolled down his window, and instead of the usual catcalls or whistles, he said something that stopped her cold. "You're going to get sunburned out there, little lady." No pickup line, no smooth talk, just genuine concern from a complete stranger. His name was Carl Dean, 21 years old. He paved roads for a living, literally laying asphalt around Nashville. He didn't know anything about the music industry, didn't care about celebrity gossip, and had no idea he'd just met the woman who would become one of the most famous people on earth. What struck Dolly most wasn't what he said, but where he looked. While most men stared at everything except her eyes, Carl looked straight at her face. He seemed genuinely interested in who she was as a person, not just what she looked like. For Carl, it was instantaneous. Years later, he'd admit his first thought was simple: I'm going to marry that girl. His second thought? Lord, she's beautiful. Dolly invited him to visit her at the house where she was staying with relatives. The next day, he showed up, and the day after that, and the day after that. For an entire week, this asphalt paver drove to see the girl from the mountains, both of them completely unaware they'd just begun something extraordinary. Their first real date wasn't glamorous. He took her to meet his parents, then treated her to McDonald's. She thought it was sweet. He thought she was everything he'd ever wanted. Neither of them could have imagined what was coming. 2 years later, in 1966, Dolly Parton was on the verge of stardom. She'd landed a spot on Porter Wagoner's television show, and her record label was investing heavily in her career. They had big plans for their rising star. There was just one problem. Dolly wanted to get married. When the label executives found out, they were furious. A husband would complicate the image they were building. They asked her to wait, promising it would be better for her career. Dolly's response? I ain't waiting. So she and Carl planned their wedding in secret. They drove 150 miles southeast to Ringgold, Georgia, a tiny town where nobody would recognize her, where Tennessee newspapers wouldn't think to look, where they could exchange vows without the flash of cameras or the weight of public expectations. The ceremony was intimate in the extreme. 5 people total: Dolly, Carl, the pastor, the pastor's wife, and Dolly's mother.
No bridesmaids in matching dresses, no groomsmen straightening their ties, no reception with a towering cake. Just two young people making promises that would define the rest of their lives. Dolly was 20, Carl was 23, and neither of them fully understood what those promises would require.
As Dolly's star began rising, industry events became unavoidable. Award shows, galas, networking parties, these were the currency of fame, the price of success, and Dolly wanted her husband there beside her. She begged Carl to attend just one event with her, just one night when the world could see the man who made her happy, when she could walk on his arm and show him off. Reluctantly, he agreed. She rented him a tuxedo. He looked handsome, distinguished even. They arrived together at the glittering event, cameras flashing, industry power players working the room. For Dolly, this was routine. For Carl, it was torture. He didn't understand the small talk, the politics, the superficiality of it all. He stood awkwardly while strangers asked intrusive questions. He smiled politely while people he didn't know acted like his best friends. Every minute felt like an hour. Before they even reached the car afterward, he was yanking off his bow tie. On the drive home, Carl made Dolly a deal that would become the foundation of their marriage. He'd support her career completely. He'd love her unconditionally. He'd be there for her in every way that mattered. But he would never, ever attend another one of those events. If people start photographing me, he explained, if they start recognizing me everywhere I go, I won't be able to live my life. I won't be able to go to the hardware store, attend ball games, or grab lunch without being bothered, and that's not the life I want. It was a stunning request, especially in an industry where spouses typically shared the spotlight, but it made perfect sense to Carl. He wasn't ashamed of Dolly, he was proud of her. He just wanted to remain himself, a simple man who loved simple things, working with his hands, living quietly, enjoying life's small pleasures. So Dolly made him a promise she would never ask again, and for the next 58 years, she kept it. As Dolly's fame exploded through the 70s and 80s, the questions intensified. "Where's your husband?" reporters asked at every red carpet. "Why doesn't he ever come to events?" interviewers pressed. "Are you really married?" tabloids wondered. Some people thought she'd invented Carl as a cover story. Others speculated the marriage was a publicity stunt. A few even suggested he didn't exist at all. Dolly's answer never changed. "He's just a private person. He supports me in his own way." But the world couldn't wrap its head around it. How could the most visible woman in country music be married to a man nobody ever saw? In 1986, when Dolly opened Dollywood, her massive theme park in Tennessee, millions of visitors walked through the gates. Her image was everywhere. On signs, in gift shops, on merchandise. Her music played constantly. Her presence saturated every corner of the park. But there wasn't a single photograph of Carl Dean anywhere. When someone suggested including him in promotional materials, he agreed on one condition. He'd only be photographed with a bag over his head. And he wasn't joking. That's exactly what happened. The invisible husband remained invisible, even in his wife's own kingdom. People called it strange, they called it suspicious, but what they didn't understand was the beauty of the arrangement. Carl had given Dolly the freedom to shine as brightly as she needed to without dimming himself in the process. He loved her enough to let her be everything the world needed her to be, while he stayed exactly who he was. No compromise, no resentment, no jealousy. Just pure, unconditional support from someone who understood that real love doesn't require the spotlight. But even the strongest marriages face tests. In the early 70s, Dolly noticed something peculiar. Carl was spending an unusual amount of time at the bank, way more than their modest finances required. At first, she brushed it off. Then she started asking questions. Turns out, there was a bank teller there. Tall, beautiful, red-haired, and she had developed quite the crush on Carl Dean. She flirted openly, made him feel special, and gave him attention that made him want to keep coming back. Carl, being a regular guy married to a superstar, apparently enjoyed the ego boost.
He made excuses to make deposits, check balances, and handle transactions that could have waited. Dolly saw what was happening, and it stirred something primal in her. "Hell, you're spending a lot of time at that bank," she'd say. "I don't think we've got that kind of money." Was she genuinely worried? Absolutely. Years later, she'd admit, "That woman had everything I didn't have. She was nearly 6 feet tall, with long legs and all that stuff a short girl like me doesn't have." So Dolly did what artists do when they're hurting. She channeled it into her work. She wrote a song that would become one of the most iconic in country music history, a desperate plea from one woman to another: "Please don't take my man." The song became a phenomenon. It hit #1, won awards, and has been covered hundreds of times since. People connected with that raw vulnerability, that honest fear of losing someone you love to someone seemingly better. But here's the ending most people don't know. Carl never left. He never even considered it. The flirtation was harmless, just a regular guy enjoying a moment of attention in a marriage where his wife happened to be one of the most famous women on earth. He came home to Dolly every single night, and he stayed faithful for 58 years. The woman at the bank never stood a chance.
When Dolly and Carl first married, they made plans, as all young couples do. They talked about their future, their dreams, and the family they'd built together. They even picked out names. If they had a daughter, they'd call her Carla, a beautiful combination of both their names, a child who would carry them forward. But Carla never came. Years passed. Dolly's career skyrocketed. She became a household name, a crossover sensation, an international icon. And through it all, there was no pregnancy, no nursery being prepared, no little feet running through their home. At first, they figured it was just timing. Then they started wondering if something was wrong. In 1984, when Dolly was 35, she got her answer: endometriosis, a painful condition affecting her reproductive system that had been causing problems for years. The following year, facing the reality of her diagnosis, Dolly underwent a partial hysterectomy. At 36 years old, her hope of having biological children ended on an operating table. The emotional impact was devastating. "Suddenly, I was a middle-aged woman," she later wrote. "I went through a really dark time." For someone who grew up in a family of 12 children, for someone who adored kids and believed she'd be an incredible mother, the loss cut deep. The future she'd imagined, Carl teaching their daughter to fish, Dolly singing lullabies, family dinners with little Carla asking questions, all of it vanished. But Carl was there through every moment. He never blamed her, never made her feel inadequate, never suggested their marriage was incomplete without children. He just held her and reminded her that they were enough, just the two of them. Years later, Dolly found a way to make peace with what happened. "God has a plan for everything," she reflected. "I think it was probably His plan for me not to have kids so that everybody's kids could be mine." She started the Imagination Library, which has given over 200 million free books to children worldwide. She became Miley Cyrus's godmother. She became Aunt Dolly to millions. And when she and Carl grew older, they'd sometimes say to each other, "Aren't you glad we didn't have kids to worry about?" But there was always something wistful in the way she said it, a wound that never completely healed, a version of her life she'd never get to live. How does a marriage survive 58 years in an industry famous for spectacular divorces and tabloid scandals? Dolly had a simple answer that always made people laugh: stay gone. There was genuine truth in that humor. Dolly was constantly traveling, recording albums, shooting movies, touring the world, running multiple businesses. Carl was home in Nashville, running his asphalt company, living his quiet life. They weren't in each other's space constantly. They didn't have the chance to drive each other crazy with daily irritations. Distance, paradoxically, kept them close. But there was more to it. Carl had nicknames for his 5-foot-tall superstar wife, Q-Tip and Pee-wee. Dolly found them hilarious. "We both have a warped sense of humor," she explained, "and I think humor is honestly one of the best things in a marriage." They also had an unusual understanding about jealousy, or rather, the complete absence of it.
"He's not jealous, and I'm not jealous of him," Dolly said plainly. "He knows I flirt, he flirts too." People often misunderstood what that meant. When asked if their marriage was open, Dolly clarified, "It's open, but not sexually. I would absolutely kill him if I thought he was doing that." The honesty was refreshing. They could look, they could appreciate other people's attention, but the line was crystal clear, and neither of them ever crossed it. The foundation was trust, absolute, unshakable trust. He never asked where she was going or who she'd be with. She never demanded details about his days at home. They gave each other room to breathe, room to be themselves, room to have lives that didn't revolve entirely around each other. "He never interfered with my business," Dolly once said. "That's why I hire managers." Carl wasn't interested in her career decisions, contract negotiations, or creative choices. He trusted her to handle all of that, and she trusted him to be exactly who he was, unchanged by her fame, unimpressed by celebrity, loving the real Dolly underneath all the sparkle.
The last few years were heartbreaking. Carl Dean, the man who'd spent 6 decades carefully guarding his privacy, began fading in a way neither of them could control. Close friends revealed he was battling Alzheimer's disease. His sharp mind, once so quick with jokes and observations, was slowly slipping away. Dolly didn't discuss it publicly. Even as he was losing himself, she protected his dignity, his privacy, his wish to remain out of the spotlight. But she changed everything else. She adjusted her schedule, spent more time at home, and was there beside him as much as humanly possible. There's one detail that's almost too painful to contemplate. Even as Carl's memory failed, even as he struggled to recognize familiar things, his eyes would still light up when Dolly entered the room. He might not remember what day it was, he might not recall what he'd eaten for breakfast, but somewhere deep inside, past all the confusion and fog, he still knew her. His face would change when he saw her. The love was still there, just buried under something neither of them could fight. In those final weeks, Dolly made him one last promise. She held his hand and told him she'd see him again, that this wasn't goodbye forever, just goodbye for now. She wanted him to be at peace, to know she'd be okay, and that when her time came, she'd find him again. On March 3, 2025, Carl Dean closed his eyes for the final time. He was 82 years old. They'd been married for 58 years, just months shy of their 59th anniversary. The man who'd been invisible to the world was finally completely gone from it. And for the first time since she was 18 years old, standing outside that Nashville laundromat, Dolly Parton was alone. 2 days after Carl died, Dolly appeared at Dollywood's 40th anniversary celebration. She smiled for crowds, posed for pictures, signed autographs. To everyone watching, she seemed like herself, the same bright, cheerful Dolly they'd always known. But behind that famous smile, she was barely holding together. Later, she'd talk about coming home to an empty house, about reaching for the phone to call him before remembering he wasn't there, about all the small routines of marriage, the little daily moments you don't think about until they're gone. A video of Dolly meeting a young child at the park during this time. The little girl was overjoyed. Dolly smiled that megawatt smile, made the child feel like the most special person in the world, and created a memory that the family would treasure forever. It looked like a normal, happy moment, but Dolly later revealed the truth. It was right after I lost Carl, and I was just so bottled up with emotion. I got in the van and just cried and cried. The world saw Dolly Parton, entertainer, icon, living legend. The grieving widow saw an empty seat beside her for the rest of her life. 3 days after Carl's death, Dolly released a song she'd written for him. In it, she thanked him for standing beside her, for believing in her when no one else did, for being her anchor while she circled the globe. "I fell in love with Carl Dean when I was 18 years old," she wrote. "We spent 60 precious and meaningful years together. Like all great love stories, they never end. They live on in memory and song. He will always be the star of my life story." 58 years, one laundromat, one white Chevrolet, one sunburn warning that turned into a lifetime.
This is the story of Dolly Parton and Carl Dean, not a Hollywood romance full of manufactured drama and coordinated publicity, not a tabloid relationship built on red carpet appearances and Instagram posts, just two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and decided to never let go. The world wanted to know who Carl Dean was. They wanted photographs, interviews, and behind-the-scenes access to the mysterious husband. They wanted to understand how Dolly Parton could be married to someone so completely invisible. Now we know the answer. Carl Dean wasn't hiding because he was ashamed. He wasn't hiding because he was jealous or insecure. He was hiding because he loved Dolly enough to let her be everything she needed to be. He understood that her light was big enough for the whole world, and he understood that if he stepped into that light with her, he'd have to give up being himself. So he made a choice. He chose to stay in the shadows. He chose to love her from a distance. He chose to be the invisible husband of the most visible woman in country music. And somehow, impossibly, it worked for 58 years. He made her one promise: don't ever ask me to go to another one of those damned things. She kept it for 58 years. She made him one promise: she'd see him again on the other side when her work was done. And she's keeping that one too. Dolly Parton is now 79 years old. She's still working, still singing, still being the Dolly the world loves. But there's an empty chair at home now, a space at the dinner table, an empty spot on the couch where Carl used to watch her on television, proud of his wife, content in his invisibility. She doesn't know how long she has left. Nobody does. But she knows where she's going when it's over. She's going to see Carl again. She promised him. And Dolly Parton always keeps her promises. If this story moved you like it moved us, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We're uncovering more untold stories like this, stories of love, loss, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. What do you think about Carl and Dolly's relationship? Was his choice to remain invisible an act of selfless love, or do you find it strange? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And remember, the greatest love stories aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the ones lived quietly, faithfully, and completely out of sight. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.